Okay, I'm going to get started then. Good morning once again. Welcome back. As always, begin with a little prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Blessed Trinity, we love you, we adore you, and we thank you for your many blessings, for the gift of life, and for having us here today once again in this beautiful day that you give us through the nature that surrounds us. We ask that you continue to inspire us as we seek to delve more deeply into the nature that surrounds us and our own human nature, to be able to develop a deep, profound vision of us as human beings, your image here on earth, to cherish and care for the environment that surrounds us. We pray as always for those who are in most need of your divine mercy at this time. In the name of Christ our Lord. Amen. All right, thank you once again for being here. Oh, here's Henry. Okay. Good morning. Welcome, welcome. First of all, any questions or comments about anything previous? No? Homework, lecture, anything at all? Are you able to see the lectures? If you look at the YouTube, everything is good, you can hear it, okay?
Regarding homework,
yep.
The summaries, the little summaries,
yep.
What do they do?
They're due Wednesday by midnight, okay? Yes, so okay. It's always every Wednesday after the lecture by midnight. Now, if some people have a particular difficulty and they cannot meet that deadline, send me an email and I'll evaluate it and I'll let you know, all right? But in principle, it's the Wednesday of midnight after every lecture, and that will be for the next year and a half, until December of next year,
okay.
All right?
What about the summary for this book?
So,
be once as well?
Yes, but it's integrated. In other words, now since the second or third chapter, I integrate the actual chapter that I'm addressing in Meyer to the lecture.
No, yeah.
So I only need one.
I was referring to the small summaries from the other class.
Oh, you're talking about you're talking about responsible research?
Yes.
The Bio 514?
Yes.
All right, right. That is, it's not that book. It's on being a scientist. That is downloaded from the internet. All right. So just to review, the Bio 514 course is totally online, and it has two main components. One is the book called On Being a Scientist, which looks like that one. You don't have to buy it. You can download it for free, all right, online. And then you can print it or not if you want. It's not too many, but it's not too many pages. It's 13 little chapters. Each chapter is a couple of pages, 2-3 pages long. I need a summary of each one of those chapters, all right? Just one paragraph is sufficient to summarize the chapter, and then you can draw a line or leave some space and then do the next chapter. Corrido, oh, page after page after page. In other words, you don't have to give me a whole page for a single chapter. See what I'm saying? And
you always have a case in here.
Yes, and generally they have a case. Most of the chapters have a case. Include the case in it. That could be maybe the last sentence on that paragraph or last two sentences. Devote a couple of sentences to the actual case that is being described there. All right? You can do that. And you send me that by email. You can send it to me piecemeal or the whole thing, but don't wait until the end because the end is approaching fast. Okay, we're less than a month away from the end of this semester. So that's one component. The other component is going online to the ethics core, single word, just ethics core, which is housed, like I've said, at the University of Illinois in the town of Urbana-Champaign, specifically in the library of the university. Okay, that's what the core is based. And it's an ethics core for science and technology. All right, so you go there, you log in, and you do 3 modules. They're called the RCR modules. And you complete the modules. At the end of the module, you get a little certificate, which is also online, virtual. And I get a notification that you've completed that module. And once you complete the 3 modules, then you're done with that component. All right, so those are the 2 requirements. You'll notice a lot of overlap because on being a scientist talks about responsible research, behavior, conduct, and the modules is also about responsible research. All right, so there's a lot of overlap there. It's just reinforcing the key points about ethics or bioethics in research.
How do we know, Father, that you got the email?
Well, you can also, it's always good practice when you finish the 3 modules to send me an email, say I've completed the 3 modules.
I did that.
Okay, and I got it, and then I respond to you, okay, or fine, or something. Once I responded, that means I got the email. All right? Yeah. Anything else on those points? No? Okay. So stay on target, stay on point, because the semester is finishing rapidly. And everybody's pretty much up to date. A few homeworks here and there. All right, so if there are no questions from previous lectures, let me just do a brief recap. So far, I've been giving you, so let me back up for a moment. This course is Fundamental Principles in Bioethics, or from a Catholic perspective, and I am proposing to you what we call a theological anthropology. In other words, a vision of the human person that is very rich, that includes also the possibility of the existence of God and the fact that we are God's image. And only we as humans, the only species existing today, that is that image of God. Whereas the rest of nature, one way or another, reflects the presence of God, or could reflect the presence of God, just like a painting could tell us something about the painter, right? Could tell us something about the artist who did that painting. That painting just didn't appear there on the wall. Someone had to paint it, all right? But that is more indirect, whereas us as God's image, it's a more direct presence of God within us, which is mysterious, because God is the ultimate mystery of any reality that we can think of. At the same time, being honest with the physical evidence that is before us, namely, what is that evidence that throws, for a pun, throws a monkey wrench, an American expression, into the whole beautiful statement of we are God's image. I mean, we could leave it at that. We are God's image, but that would be just theological, right? Where's the anthropology in it? Where's the anthropos? In other words, where's the more scientific, meaning empirical, meaning measurable? When we say empirical, what do we mean? That it can be measured, right? That it has matter and or energy. So where is the empirical evidence that could throw a monkey wrench into our beautiful statement of the human as God's image? Well, but can we actually observe evolution occur? It is evolution, but we're calling it evolution. It's a process that we call evolution, right? For example, computer models evolve, right? I don't know if you remember the first cell phone or the first mobile portable phone. Deacon Lewis, we were dating ourselves, right? It used to be a huge box that you carry around, and it was even bigger, much bigger than just a landline phone, okay? It was basically a radar you were carrying around with your radar that was able to transmit and receive signals. Big, bulky thing that you carry around, and heavy also, to this, many generations later. So there has been an evolution, right? But that's a technological one. How about in nature? What is the actual physical evidence, the main one, the more direct one, that we can say, well, there have been previous species that are no longer around today? 2 key words: the fossil record. The fossil record. A fossil, I have a bone in front of me that is mineralized, is now a piece of stone, because this bone has mineralized, so now it's a stone. But before, when this bone was living inside some organism, it was not stone, right? It was not mineralized, it was calcified, but it was part of a creature of a living organism that is not around today, right? So what does that mean? Why are they not around today? And where did they come from? And then it begs the question, where did we come from? Because we also have bones, and they're very similar to what we call ancestors, to other organisms that are not around today. Okay. So the fossil record keeps us honest. It forces us, if we want to use our brains, it forces us to look at what evidence they might be there, that just as every other species has evolved, we too may have evolved. So the whole idea here is to keep that delicate balance between believing God and the supernatural and the fact that He is creator, all right, but not a magician. And the fact that evolution seems to have occurred when we look at this overwhelming evidence that surrounds us. Species that were around before are not around today. And so that's the whole stuff of evolutionary biology, which, by the way, it is the central paradigm for explaining all of biology today. In other words, all of what do we mean by biology? Again, key basic concepts. What do we mean by biology? Remember, these are compound words. Typically, they derive from Latin, and they're typically two key words. Typically, it's a noun and an adjective, right? So it's some substance, and it's being modified by the adjective. But what is biology?
Study of life.
Study of life. Biologos, right? But what kind of life? Are we studying angels here? By belief, we believe, all right? We believe the area in the realm of faith that angels exist. We also believe that God exists. But can we study that scientifically? Not scientifically in the empirical sense, because they're not measurable, right? All right, they're not subject to some instrument. So when we talk about life in biology, we're talking about organic life. In other words, the life that surrounds us, and we look out the window and we see all this nature around us. At the biochemical level, what is that life? It's a word also that defines organic life at the biochemical level. Metabolism. In other words, if something is living, if that plant is living right now, that plant is metabolizing. And if we are alive, we are metabolizing. And those are very complex, sophisticated, and elegant chemical reactions that are occurring in our body, but they are certainly measurable. And that's what the doctor does. When we go to the doctor, they do a blood panel, all right? They check all the electrolytes and all the chemicals in our blood system to see how healthy we are. That's all chemistry. It's very, very measurable, down to a very minute, precise amount. Okay? So how to integrate faith and science, faith and reason, what is evident in front of us, and at the same time, being honest with our beliefs, so that if our beliefs don't match the reality that is in front of us, then we have a problem. Either the beliefs are wrong or the reality is wrong, right? Because truth cannot contradict itself. Okay, but this is we're trying to look at a deep truth about the human person. And that's going to be our foundation, because then our anthropology is going to define our bioethics. Our anthropology is going to define how we stand on the bioethical issues at the beginning of life, at the end of life, in healthcare, and with the environment. Right? Okay, questions, comments? We're on board? So far in this course, I've tried to present to you the evidence for evolution. Okay? And that evidence is based on observations. And one of those 5 key observations, okay, what's one major observation and that points to selection. That selection is happening in nature. Was one of those 5 key observations when we look out the window again into nature. We could look at, for example, progeny. And is there a scarcity of progeny? Is there a scarcity of gametes being produced? No, it's quite the opposite, right? There's an overabundance of gametes. There's an overabundance of progeny. And yet, on average, at least for species that reproduce sexually, how many are actually needed to replace the parents? Only 2, one of each sex, right? And we see this overabundance into the hundreds, into the thousands, sometimes into the millions. Why? The vast majority of those don't make it. So the inference is that there is selective pressure going on, right? So because limited resources and because of predation and so forth. All right, so that's one key observation. Another one is when we start comparing individuals within the same species. Morning, welcome. And within the population of the same species. So you realize how many populations can we have of the same species? It's an open question, right? Any number of populations. What are you talking about, doctor? Are you talking about, if you talk about human population, all right, then what's the standard, what's the consensus among scientists? All right, that for the human, how many populations do we have on Earth? 1. Why? If we're using the biological definition of species, again, coming from Meyer, right? One of his big contributions from that century. What's the biological definition of species?
The same species to produce a viable offspring.
Exactly. To produce viable offspring is the first, and the second is that offspring is fertile, so that it can pass on. So you really want 3 generations there, right? You want the parental generation, and then the offspring, you want them to be fertile also, and that's some kind of guarantee that there will be perpetuity of the species. Okay? So back to the issue of why scientists consider that for the human species, there's only 1 population on Earth. We apply the biological definition of species. That means that in principle, any man on Earth who is fertile is capable of procreating with any woman on Earth who is also fertile and producing offspring who themselves will be fertile. Okay? And in principle, there is nothing that prevents that except the natural barriers of continents, for example, and distance, which has also been overcome by a technology, specifically the technology of transportation. All right? Okay. In contrast to that, we could have any number of populations of one species. For example, a species that we talked about, the aphid. What's an aphid? People remember? Yeah. That lives where? Tell me a little about the habitat and the niche of the aphid. Yeah, it's an insect, creepy crawler, right? Where do they live? On the little twigs of plants. And how do they feed? On the sap, right? I tell you they feed on the sap of that little twig. So are they good or bad for the plants? Bad, nasty, they're parasitic, all right? They're debilitating the plants. And do they move a lot? Oh, they tend to be slow moving and they tend to stay to their own little twigs, so you can have several populations of aphid in a single plant. And because they are populations, by definition, they're the same species. But generally, they're not going to mix. And if they do move from one branch to another, one twig to another, what do we call that kind of thing? Well, there's partition, there's niche partition, yes. A gene flow, all right? Gene flow is flowing. This aphid is carrying its genes from this little population to this other little population here where it's visiting, all right? And while it's visit, it may mate, and so now there's been flow of the gene pool from this little population into this other little population. It gets that technical, it gets that detailed. So you can think that generally, what's the intuition then? Large animals or more mobile animals tend to have what? Larger territories, bigger populations, geographically, habitat and niche, all right? Whereas in general, we can say there could be a correlation between size and number of populations. Because in general, the smaller the animal or the plant, it tends, well, plants is even more drastic because they're generally grounded. But even animals, they tend to be in smaller clusters, and therefore you can have more number of populations of the same species. Think of oysters growing on pilings at a pier. What would be a population of oysters? Same species, Ostra, whatever the species is of oyster, all right? Let's say the pier has 8 pilings. In principle, how many population of oysters do we have on that pier? 8. We have 8 populations of oyster. Because that's oyster, the adult, and who's reproducing? Is the juvenile that's reproducing, which is a larva, which is part of the plankton? No, it's the adult that's reproducing, right? So, in principle, this oyster stuck to this one piling is not going to jump and swim around to the next piling because they're grounded, they're stuck, all right? Even adjacent pilings, let alone the piling that is even further away. So it's crucial. I'm trying to hammer it in because it's difficult to get this through at times. The concept of different populations of the same species. They have their particular gene pool. What am I trying to get at with all this stuff? I'm trying to get at variation. Variation, varieties, or variants within a population, within a species, okay? So is variation evident in the human, for example, in the human population, in the human species? Yes, how so? What are we looking at when we're looking at variance or variation? What are we looking at physically? Okay, we're looking at 4 categories, right? Morphological, physiological, behavioral. Remember the twins? They dress differently, so they look almost identical. All right, it took me quite a while to pull out some morphological differences on the freckles and whatnot. But let's say we say, no, there are no differences there to the morphological. Physiological, we don't know inside, all right, unless we do some chemical testing. But behavioral, just a different dressing, that's behavioral. Okay, so there's variation there, there's variance there. It could be that if they are women in their reproductive years, one man may be more attracted to red colors, the other man may be attracted to blue colors. That's subconscious sexual selection that's going on. Okay? So the one twin would get the genes from the blue colored guy, and the other twin will get the genes from the red colored guy. Okay? Slight variation, but variation. Okay? That variation continues to repeat and repeat over generations. It could lead to speciation, evolution. Okay? And so there are these different aspects of the phenotype of each species within each population that is particular to that population. Mm-hmm. And there may be, depending on the individual species, there may be a lot of variation between populations of the same species, okay? Even adjacent populations. There may be a lot of variation depending on the species, or there may be very little variation depending on each species. And that goes for animals, that goes for plants, that goes for the fungi, and that goes for the protists, and that goes for the other 2 groups of living things that are definitely microscopic. the prokaryotes. What are those two groups of prokaryotes? The bacteria and the archaea. So that covers the whole biosphere. You see what I'm saying? So variation. And selection is acting on variation, on variance. Slightly advantage to be able to run a little faster. It's a slight advantage, but just enough to get away from the predator. The guy behind me didn't make it. Okay, so that gives me a selective advantage, perhaps to mate, whereas the guy behind me will not mate. Maybe he had better genes overall, but not on the running, and that's what took him down. See how it works? So, I mean, you have layers of complexity that are interacting dynamically at the same time. So we talk about these forces, and scientists have pretty much figured out down to these, distilled it, if you will, to the four main fundamental forces. In fact, Meyer, did you notice how many forces of evolution does he have? So if you remember, he has about 6 or 7, all right? But I have actually clustered some. I think he has, for example, he has mutation and recombination separate, all right? But I cluster them into, well, it's DNA anyway. So it's either DNA at the individual nucleotide level, or it's DNA in the configuration, or how it separates, how the two alleles separate during meiosis and so forth. But it's DNA, so we can cluster them, all right? Anyway, those 4 are fairly distinct from each other. The mutation cluster. Then you got gene flow at the level of individuals within a population. Then you got drift, which is why is drift important? In addition, because you could almost say, well, it's a kind of gene flow, but not really, because what does drift open up to, which is part of the universe? Yes, exactly. Chance, random events. Okay, random events that happen. And it's important to keep that open, because that has to do somehow with the energy flow and the whole issue of the universe as a whole moving toward randomness, okay, or entropy. And those laws are established, they've been discovered, and they hold every time a particular observation is made. Those laws apply, so they're called universal law, the fundamental laws of thermodynamics. Okay, and then, but those 3 other factors or forces, again, mutation, migration, which is also gene flow at the genetic level. Migration is gene flow. Then there is the drift, which introduces stochastic or chance processes. Those are kind of predisposition, right? In other words, there may be a mutation that is either advantageous or deleterious. Let's say, first of all, most mutations are neutral, so they don't have an effect, all right? Mutation occurs, but no selection happened because the mutation is neutral. Keep in mind, 97% of the genome is non-coding, so if there's going to be a mutation, chances are that it could occur on the 97%, which doesn't code for any protein. In principle, it doesn't have any effect, unless it may affect the higher order structure of DNA itself. However, those 3 other forces are kind of predispositions, all right? But what actually needs to happen for some change to occur in the species? The actual selection. Okay, so we call it selective pressure, the actual selection, which we know that physically, at the level of event, right? Selection is what kind of a process in nature? It's an elimination process. It's a process of elimination. Just like we do in sports, just like we do in games, in cards, right? Any game that you play is some kind of an elimination process going on, right? And the best, on average, the best continue to rise and rise. All right? Okay. So this all to say that if these forces are acting on other species around, we can ask the question, are these forces also acting on the human species? In other words, have we evolved? And again, what do? As scientists, we have to be hardcore. If I can't measure this thing, it doesn't exist scientifically. It's not empirical. And then that will bring us to the most evident stuff, right, that we see that points to the evolution of the human also, which is the fossil record. The cranii, the bones, the femurs, the teeth, the ribs that have been found, and even pretty intact skeletons, relatively intact skeletons of creatures that look very similar to us, including bipedalism, being, walking upright on two. And all the animals that we see around can stay walking on two for any prolonged period of time. Okay? So it's at least intriguing. So let's get into that intrigue. Let's start with the biological classification of the human as Homo sapiens. If you accept this statement, okay, if you accept this statement, that has consequences. It's not without any consequence. Because that is the beginning of accepting the possibility that we have also evolved. Because classifying the human as Homo sapiens scientifically, empirically, means that we are related, that we are connected with other species, because there are other species that are not Homo sapiens, but are species, are alive, organic. All right? So then we look at the hierarchy of Homo sapiens, the taxonomy. We belong to the genus Homo, of course, because that's included in the species. And, well, let me start from the top. Every cell of our body has a nucleus, except some very specialized cells that started out with the nucleus, but then ditched it. All right? It's called enucleation, to ditch the nucleus, to push it out of the cell. Anyone know what those cells are? One very, very important cell in our body. It keeps metabolism going. Exactly. Which blood cell? Because there are several blood cells, right? There's RBCs, WBCs, there are lymphocytes. The red blood cell, the RBC, exactly. The RBC has ditched out, in humans, has ditched out its nucleus because it's kind of out of the way. It's in the way. In other words, the RBC has become super specialized. They're not going to last too long. They're being replaced all the time by bone. Where are RBCs produced? I give it away. Yeah, bone marrow, right? So inside the bone, especially the long bones of our body, femur, but also the ribs, for example, and they have the inner core of the bone, which is called bone marrow. It's reddish, actually a purple color, and that's where the blood cells are produced. But that's inside the bone, and the bone is hard on the outside, right? So how do those cells get out into the circulatory system? You think that they're trapped inside the bone. How do they get out? And there are millions produced right now as we speak, every day, to replenish the old ones that are getting worn out. Especially if they don't have a nucleus, they don't have a repair mechanism. Well, it turns out that they're being pushed out right through the bone, because at the microscopic level, bone is very porous. At the microscopic level, at the level of single cell, they squish through the bone, out through cavities, through pores, into the outside of the bone, and then around the outside of the bone, what are you going to find? What's your intuition? A lot of capillaries picking up those blood cells. And that's why when bones break, they bleed a lot, because they're full of capillaries all around them to pick up the RBCs and the YBCs and all the blood cells that are being produced and circulate it, right? And then, because we're producing millions of these every day to replenish the ones that are dying, what happens to the ones that are dying? Why don't we just blow up with blood and blow up in 24 hours with the excess of blood that we produced, blood cells? They're being recycled, the ones that, because they're moving through, it takes an average of what? I think it's about 30 seconds from an RBC to go from my heart to the tip of my toe back to the heart. Okay, and that's a lot of, I don't know how many hundreds of feet of travel through capillaries and the whole bloodstream, but it's quite extensive, all right? And they wear out. And so what happens to the old RBCs? Like it happens inside the body many times. We talked about it with egg and sperm. The spleen, exactly. They're being digested by the spleen. So the spleen has a vital function that way in absorbing the old RBCs and digesting them, breaking them down, and recycling the material. Okay? So nature is very economic. It's into recycling big time. Okay, anyway, that I was talking about the exception. The rule of the trillions of cells in our body is that they have a nucleus. They're nucleated. That means that makes us what? Prokaryotes or eukaryotes. The big picture, at the domain level, we are eukaryotes. We have true nuclei in our cells. So at that level, we have common ancestry with every other animal, with every other plant, every other fungus, okay, that is in nature, and every other protist also, microorganisms that have true nuclei. So at that level, we have common ancestry big time. There's some level of homology there, slight but real, all right? Because we all have these nuclei inside ourselves. We can drill down further, all right? So among those three main groups, which are what? What are the three main groups? Animal, plant, fungi, right? Of the macroscopics, those three main groups. Which one of those three do we belong to? The animal, because we don't photosynthesize, and we're not saprophytes either, like fungi. All right, so at the level of kingdom, we're in the animal kingdom. We can drill down further. You see, we're going from what? We're going from the general adaptedness, right? Looking down, drilling into more specific adaptedness, more specific, okay? And it makes sense. There's an order, there's a hierarchical order. All right, so we look at some characteristics that are more unique to us with regards to the structural system, the system that gives us mobility. It gives us at the same time rigidity and flexibility, what we call the skeleton, all right? Rigidity and flexibility. So it gives us the capacity to be larger. Typically, animals that have a skeleton, that have an internal skeleton, are larger. The larger animals on Earth typically have an internal skeleton, okay? All others have to stay small, like worms and even the arthropods. They have a skeleton, but it's not internal, right? It's what kind of a skeleton for the arthropods? External skeleton, exoskeleton. Give an example of an arthropod, Henry. An example of an arthropod. Articulated legs. Yeah. Another one, Luis? Crab. Luis, another arthropod. Articulated legs. Come on. What is it, Father? I can't hear you.
Oh, lobster.
Yeah, but they said that right. Lobsters and crabs. Okay, those are crustaceans. How about land? They're all over the place. They eat a lot of grass. They eat a lot of millipede. Yeah. What else? Spiders. Yeah. Insects, butterflies. Yeah. Right. Exactly. All the crunchy ones, right? They have an external skeleton. They tend to stay small. They have a skeleton, but they're small. Okay? So the internal skeleton has a definite advantage, basically in size. All right. So according to that internal skeleton, We are chordates. What does that mean? Exactly. We have a spinal cord that offers rigidity, but then we can drill down. There's a subphylum in here, and we're more known by that subphylum. Not only do we have a spinal cord, it turns out that that spinal cord is segmented. That's the flexibility part. And what are those segments called? They're called vertebrae, right? And so we are vertebrates. Within the vertebrates, there are 5 main groups, right? What are those 5 groups?
Fish,
Yep, fish.
amphibian, reptilian,
Yep. Mammal and
and birds. Yeah.
birds, perhaps derivative of the reptiles, right? Okay, so that puts us at the level of class. All right, so you see how we're drilling down here now, and the traits are becoming more specific, right? The adaptiveness is becoming more and more specific. Mammals, one of the 5 groups, and what's the main characteristic of the class mammals? Even more characteristic, that's the name. The name. We have mammary glands, okay? In fact, both sexes have mammary glands, interesting. Non-functional in the male, but they're there, okay? Technically, they're called secondary sexual characteristics, and we'll look at them, but it's a phenotype. It's a phenotype, it's right there, okay? All mammals that I look around normally have mammary glands. And so that's the class. Fish, any mammary glands on the fish? No, therefore, a dolphin that looks like a fish a little bit, do they have mammary glands? Yeah, because they're mammals, actually. There's behind the pectoral fin, okay? And whales too. Whales, I think a calf whale has to drink, I don't know how many gallons of milk a day. A calf whale, gallons of milk. Yeah. Okay. We can drill further in, more specific adaptiveness within the mammals. We have been classified as the primates. In other words, primate is kind of, it says that these are the primary. Okay, primate is a reference to the main mammals, basically, loosely translated. Further into specific adaptedness, hominids. Hominids, these are also known as the great apes, assume. Then this category of tribe, you're not too familiar with it, I suppose, but it's there because we needed some intermediate between family and genus. There were more specific adaptations that were showing up, but they were common between Homo and non-Homo. Okay, so this tribe, this category. And I want you to know that in between each one of these categories, between each one of these hierarchical levels, there are subcategories. The one that is very common that I mentioned is the subphylum Vertebrata or vertebrates. All right, that's a subphylum, but it's more known than chordate. If you tell people, well, the snake is a chordate or the snake is a vertebrate, which one do you think they'll understand better? The snake is a vertebrate. It's my intuition, okay? But that's a subcategory of the chordate. At any rate, all these, they have subclasses, they have sub and supra categories, and then those are further broken down into other smaller divisions. For example, the sub have infra, and even the infra is broken down further and so forth. It gets very technical. But this one tribe, and there is sub-tribe, and there is supra-tribe, and there's infra-tribe.
When was that added?
It's ongoing. It's ongoing because, exactly. So it's a good question in the sense that classification taxonomy is a whole field. It's a whole science. People make money. They live full-time taxonomists, classifying species, all right? And they have to be very up and up. And if there's not a category, but they find homologies that are similar to others but different, they try to make a case for generating a new category or an infra category. You always try to be as inclusive as possible, but then when you get into divergence, and that's why we had that the new phylogenetic tree is so complex, right? It looks like a whole rainbow of divergence. The tree has a lot of branches. That's because of taxonomy. So it's ongoing. It's a work in progress. And the system, that's the beauty of the system, even though it was invented by Linnaeus originally, it's very dynamic. It lends itself to further and further. It's a little bit like folders in a computer. You can create any, I don't know how far, I've never gone so far as to find out the last layer of folder that one can do. But I'm sure it's probably in the dozens, if not in the hundreds, right? A folder within a folder within a folder within a folder. I don't know how deep you can go into that. But that's analogous. Yes?
What are some characteristics that a hominin would have that a hominid doesn't?
Exactly. Let's go there. Thank you. So I'll move you to the second slide out of 2,000 slides. Okay. So if we look at this graphically, this is an adaptation. As you can see, I just cut and paste on top of the older diagram that I gave you in the introductory lecture. Okay. That shows it matches on the horizontal axis here. It gives, again, the 8 categories, 7 or 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 8, right? All the way from domain down into species, okay? On the diagonal, I'm giving you the specific for the human, all right? So at the level of species, we're Homo sapiens. At the level of genus, we're Homo. At the level of family, we're hominid, etc. You follow, right? And it's an increasing homology. We share an increasing number of homologies with other species the further out we go on the classification. So at the level of Homo, we share with other hominins, right? Here, this is a drawing, right? Cannot be a photograph of a Neanderthal, Homo neanderthalis or Neanderthalensis, which lived mostly in Europe and coexisted with the human, at least from the fossil record, with Homo sapiens for a number of years, several thousand years, overlapping. But they are extinct today. We have their records, and there's a fairly good amount of fossils of Neanderthals from the mostly from Europe. If we go one step out to the family level, we are at the hominid level. There we share with other hominids that are now extinct. So again, this though it looks like a photograph, it's not a photograph because it's an extinct species. All right, this one happens to be Australopithecus, I think it's afarensis, otherwise known as Lucy, right? She was about half our height, very thin and nimble, but she was bipedal. And fully bipedal because she left her prints actually on the mud about, I think was it about 2 million years ago. And eventually she died and left her skeleton nearby. So there is the evidence, fully bipedal and extinct. Further out, we get to the primates. That one we share with the other great apes, which are 3 other ones, 3 other main ones: the chimp, the gorilla, and the orangutan. All right? And so people subdivide the chimp into 2, the chimp and the bonobo. I'll talk about that briefly again. The level of mammals, well, they're about, that's what I put over here. Sorry, let me move this over a little bit. Right, so the numbers up here is the approximate number of classes in the phylum chordate. So in the phylum chordate, there are about 5 to 7 classes, depending on how you classify them. All right, one of them being mammals. In the order within the mammals, there are about 26 to 28 orders of mammals. See how these numbers work? One of which is the primates. Within the primates, there are anywhere from 5 to 15 families of primates, depending on how they're classified. The hominids being one of them. I'll drill a little bit more into that in a minute. By the time we get to genus of the hominids, by the time we get to the genus Homo, there's only one living Homo genus on Earth, which is Homo sapiens. Okay? So see how those numbers work? It's within the particular category. So 5 to 7 classes of chordates, 26 to 28 orders of mammals, 5 to 15 families of primates, and a single genus and species of the hominids at the Homo level. Okay. Further? If we stay within the primates, the order of primates, right? To what class do the primates belong? What class? Class is further up, right? Remember? So it has to be order within the class. If you remember that, if you teach high school or elementary school, there has to be order in the class, otherwise you can't teach, right? Okay, so order is within the class. So people don't know which comes first. So which is bigger, which is broader, class or order? Class, right? Order within the class. All right, so within the order of primates, so what class do the primates belong to? Mammalia, mammals, right? Okay, within the class, within the primates, there are those, what is it? Here, there's 5 to 15. 5 to 15, all right? I'm trying to get to the hominids. And these are the big categories. Starting with the most primitive ones, lemurs, then lorises and potos, bush babies, tarsiers. What do you notice about these three last? The lorises, the bush babies, and the tarsiers at the level of phenotype that is very evident between these three and not the other three categories. Big eyes, right away, big eyes. Okay, what does that tell you about their behavior? Nocturnal. And they tend to be small and fragile, not move around too fast, therefore they can get eaten easily if they're seen. Okay, so that's why they're nocturnal. See adaptiveness, all right? Okay, moving further, we have two large groups of monkeys, of day monkeys, which are the New World monkeys and the Old World monkeys. All right, and oops, sorry. Finally, there is, where can I grab? Let's try here. The apes. Now look at the phylogenetic tree. Branching between the Old World monkeys and the apes, this by the way is a baboon, male baboon. Branching is estimated between 20 and 30 million years ago. Okay, this is a node. Between these and the New World monkeys, the branching is estimated to have occurred between 40 and 30 million years ago. What do you think happened here? Old World, New World. Pangea split into Gondwanaland, and Gondwanaland split further into America and Africa, specifically South America and Africa, right? Okay. Okay, going further back in time, the split with the tarsiers. Here's the node between 40 and 50 million years ago. All right. Further back, the split between this group and the more primitive group. Here's the node. Okay. That split happened between 60 and 70 million years ago. So there was a big branching off here into two main large groups. These lemurs, lorises, and bush babies, and these tarsiers, monkeys, and apes. All right? Now think a little bit, stuff that you already know, and it's known in the general public, between 70 and 60 million years ago, some very voracious predators that became extinct, a mass extinction. Remember mass extinction? Were the dinosaurs, right? Extremely voracious. That opened for expansive radiation. Remember? Mass extinction followed by expansive radiation. One of the major groups to expand and radiate was the mammals in general. Okay? And in particular, the primates. There we go. So the primates can be traced back to some kind of little creature that was able to survive the dinosaurs, but barely. Okay? Probably lived up in a tree somewhere, hiding quite a bit. And that's been traced back to about 90 million years ago. You would expect here to have some other connection with some other orders, right? The orders would be connected here. Okay, so understand how this works? Yes? We want to focus in here, actually into the apes, so let's go right down into the apes. These are known as the great apes, and now we're into the family, at the family level, particular adaptedness. The great apes, which I mentioned, are 4 or 5 if you split the chimps into bonobos and chimps. Percentage homology. What do I mean by percentage homology? The degree of similarity at what level? At the molecular level, specifically, the molecules that are going to be the more consistent molecules are either the molecules of inheritance or the molecules of metabolism, right? The molecules of inheritance going to be the DNA. The molecules of metabolism, proteins. Think of enzymes. All enzymes are proteins. Not all proteins are enzymes, but metabolism, enzymes, right? Okay, so percentage homology at that level, that's pretty deep within the species, right? The DNA and the proteins that that species is made up of. And these are the percentage homology. Pretty tight. Okay, what does this mean? Approximately, don't forget the little wiggle, okay? That's approximately. That means that the genome of the orangutan is about 97% identical to the genome of the human. That's striking. So that 3% is extremely important, okay? And it's not the active 3%. By the way, this is whole genome, so it includes also the non-coding region. But if the non-coding region is non-coding, who cares? We can share with the bacteria, so who cares? It's non-coding, okay? It's a little exaggerated because it may have another function, not by way of producing proteins, but some other function that could be regulatory, etc. But anyway, these percentages, you know, don't lie. And this is close to, this is statistic, which is close to math. And as I say, the numbers don't lie. When we do the sequencing, right, the genome sequencing, this is what comes up time and again. And it's not just this one orangutan that they sequence. They sequence a number of orangutans to get an average, to get a range. So there's going to be a range also. Okay, so 97 with the orangutan, 98 with the gorilla, 99 with the chimp. And then I put the cranii here because within this large percentage of similarity, we see quite a drastic difference in the specific adaptedness of the cranii. Namely, we see a clustering of the first 3 cranii that they have some very common characteristics, that are uncommon for the human. For example, there are about 3, maybe 4 characteristics about this cranium on the orangutan that is very evident, very visible, very prominent. If you were to find this and you would say, oh, evidently orangutan skull, you find it in the middle of the jungle somewhere. You have to be in Borneo or somewhere in Asia, right? Oh, evidently this is an orangutan skull. And what are 3 or 4 phenotypic, morphological things that are striking about this cranium, this skull? Yeah, look at that jaw. Huge jaw, right? Huge jaw. And about the profile of the face itself. Go to the other extreme. Very flat face compared to very protruding snout, right? Very protruding snout. The sockets, well, again, pretty extreme. It's more extreme in the gorilla, actually. You can tell me about the sockets and the orbits. Look at that, look at that brow. Extremely prominent brow, particularly on the gorilla, okay? But also on the chimp, look at that profile. And also on the orangutan, the less. What do you think that's about, that prominent profile around the orbitals, on the sockets? Protection, right? Bone is for protection. And how about this crest over here in the back? Look at it. It's a bony crest at the distal end of the cranium. Unique to the gorillas, right? Look at that. And it may even be unique to the male. I don't know. I didn't go into it, but it may even be unique to the gorilla. I can think of 2 functions. I really don't know, but my intuition is 2 functions. Whenever you see like a flap like that, all right, what are flaps used for in machines? To dissipate heat. Dissipates heat. But in this one, looking at this gorilla and the posture, it's a very impressive posture, right? It's kind of an intimidating posture. What does this crown do up here? Makes the face even bigger, taller, more prominent, okay? And there's nothing behind it. The brain case is actually very small, the actual brain case, but it looks pretty big and impressive. So it's all about posturing, really. Anyway, so the jaw on all 3, it's a common characteristic of the other 3 great apes and not of the human. So that's telling us something about their diet. They have to chew a lot, right? And gnaw a lot and chew a lot. And look at, associated with that, we certainly have heterodonts. We're heterodonts. What does that mean? As opposed to homodonts. Dont is a reference to the teeth. Homo, same. Hetero, different. So we have different kinds of teeth, right? We have the incisors, canines, the molars, premolars. All those different shapes, form follows function, have different functions. Some for grinding, some for tearing, etc. Pretty predominant. These are the canines, right? Yeah. So if they grab up to something, they don't want to let go. But at the same time, the molars are also pretty prominent. So what kind of diet? This is an omnivore diet that they eat both plants and animals. Whenever they can catch an animal, they'll eat it. But mostly, the easier prey is plants. So they're mostly vegetarian. Mostly vegetarian. Okay. All right, so the prominent canines are also typical of the other 3 apes and not of us. Our canines are rather small, even though we're definitely carnivores. We're omnivores, okay? But the whole jaw structure, the lower jaw, the upper jaw, and even the teeth are diminished compared to the other 3 great apes. Look at this whole prominent snout here, okay? That is telling us something about our diet. That has to do specifically with fire, and I'll leave it at that, because I'll pick up in it in the second half. The eyes also, and the prominent crest around the sockets is typical of the other 3 great apes, but not of us. So these are characteristics on the face part, on the front part of the skull. We are less, there's less overall structure, right? Compare this profile with this profile, these. But on the back side of the face, are we less or more? We're definitely more. We have more cranial capacity. So on the face in general, there are less smaller structures, okay? More subtle, more delicate, etc. But on the back side of the face, the skull, the back side of the skull, definitely much larger, okay? And specifically, at least 3 times larger. The volume, this is volume, not just length, all right? One thing is to be 3 times longer, but 3 times larger in volume, volumetrically. Considering the convolution of the brain, right? The in and out folding, that gives the possibility of a huge, much larger surface. The gray matter, what's it called? The cortex. Exactly, the cortex, much larger, which is where the higher function occurs, where the thinking process even into abstract thought. That's where it occurs, on the cortex. So the more cortex you have, the more of that function we can have, all right? And we do have. Okay, let's move forward. Because these are all contemporaries, right? Chimps are around today, and so are gorillas and orangutans. And therefore, to say that we derive from them or that they derive from us is impossible. It's not scientific. Why? Because there are no contemporary ancestors. Those 2 words, by definition, are mutually exclusive. Contemporaries mean that we all live here today. Ancestor, by definition, was before. And I'm not talking about parents or grandparents or great-grandparents, because they can be around. I'm talking about many generations before, not around today. By definition, if they're ancestors, they're not here today. And that's why we cannot say that we derive from the monkeys or that the monkeys derive from us. Those are unscientific statements. Okay, so that takes care of one perception out there that we derive from the monkey, and that's heresy. And it is heresy, scientifically speaking. All right? No current species derives from any other current species. That applies universally because we're all contemporaries. All right? But with regards to ancestors, yes, there's homology. So there has to be common ancestors. At what point? So how far can we narrow it down to the common ancestor, to the least common, or to the last common ancestor? In other words, where is the last node, right? Between the human and the non-human. At least it's an intriguing question. So let's look at it. Okay, now I'm going to switch gears a little bit into the fossil record, because now I'm going to talk about ancestors. Okay? And it's estimated we start with a general paucity of the fossil record. What do I mean by that? A paucity of the fossil record. That there's an overabundance of fossils out there? Certainly not, right? They're few and hard to come across, and many of them are buried. Every now and then, some become unearthed, and you see a little point of something, and the expert eye digs in there and finds a whole skull or a whole skeleton. Typically, it's a fragment of a bone, what they find. And then, whose bone does that belong to? What species? Well, at least we know it's not a plant because they don't have bones. At least we know it's not an invertebrate because they don't have bones either. So we're already narrowed down into the chordates. And within the chordates, into the vertebrates. Because the hemichordates and the urochordates, which are the other ones, they don't have a segmented backbone. All right, so the fossil record is pointing to a divergence between the chimp line and us, or the hominin line, between 6 to 8 million years ago. That's on the broad range. If you take the center of that, well, then you can say it's either between 5 and 8 million years ago on the broad range, or between 6 and 7 million years ago on the narrow range. It's about the same. All right. The fact is that we have very, very few bones, very few fossils to document that. But the fact that we have any fossils at all is intriguing, it's exciting, and it is revealing. All right, and here's where the experts need to come in. So the hominin line, remember this hominin is a tribe, right? It's not a genus, it's larger than a genus, but it's smaller than a family. So within the family, what family are we in here? We're the family of primates, right? One of the 26 or 28 families of mammals. What's another family of mammals that is not a primate? Quickly, cetaceans, which are whales and dolphins. They're definitely mammals, they're definitely not primates. Another one, zebras, horses, cattle, etc., ungulates, the ones who walk on their nails, right? Okay, carnivores, etc. So those are other mammals that are not primates. Here we're within the primates, and we're looking at divergence within the primates. We're trying to distinguish ourselves now from the other 3 great apes. We're trying to look at this line here. How far back is that node? Okay? So, according to the experts, is between 5 and 8 million years ago, or if you want to be risky, that's if you want to be on the safe side. If you want to be on the risky side, say, no, it's anywhere between 6 and 7 million years ago. Fine. Okay, show me the bones anyway. And these are the bones. We're going to go on the homini branch then, which are now all extinct, because they're fossils, by definition, all extinct. But you can see there's about a dozen different species of hominins that have been unearthed so far, okay? Mostly in the last century, mostly in Africa. All right, so here's a diagram from a well-known book from Barton and Associates. The book is Evolution from 10 years ago. All right. Oh yeah. Notice here, so the one that has been placed the oldest, the fossil record that has been the fossil that has been dated oldest is this Sahelanthropus between 6 and 7 million years ago. All right. And I put it here because it's not in this particular diagram. This goes deeper into the hominin line. So here's Sahelanthropus. Again, break the word down. Anthropus is a reference to human or human-like. Anthropoid, human-like. Sahel is the border, the strip of land between the Sahara, south of the Sahara, and the tropical rainforest that is down there, the Belgian Congo and all that. Well, now it's the Congo Republic. And so the Sahara is in the northern part of Europe, the broadest part, and then Africa narrows down like a funnel, if you will. In the midsection, right around the equator, is a tropical rainforest, very lush, abundant, high biodiversity, comparable to the Amazon on this side. And in between those two is a broad strip that is getting broader currently, and it's called the Sahel. All right, it's south of the Sahara. So that's the reference. I'll show you some maps in a minute. Okay, moving in on this classification by the experts of the fossil record, which typically are, they're lucky if they find a whole cranium. Typically, it's a fragment of the cranium. But to find a cranium is more exciting than to find a rib, for example, right? Because it's more informative. Specifically, by the contour of that fragment of a cranium, with computers, one can complete approximately what it would look like according to the angles that are there, and do a reconstruction, a virtual reconstruction, but fairly accurate within, maybe millimeters of the whole cranium. And once we're able to reconstruct that whole cranium virtually, then we can determine what? Its volume, and therefore its brain capacity, and then making some assumptions of the convolutions, the overall surface area of the cortex, of the cerebral cortex, which is what we know from other studies where higher thought occurs. Like I say, including abstract thought, okay? So, moving into the fossil record, we going through Australopithecus, we end up in two main branches, the Australopithecine line and the Homo line. All right, so two genera, the Australopithecine line and the Homo line. Again, the names can be intimidating because they're long and Latin, but not to worry. Pithecus is a Latin name for ape. All right, Pithecus. And Australo, where is Australia? Northern or southern hemisphere? Southern hemisphere. So Australo is a reference to the south, southern hemisphere. And that's why Australia is called Australia, because it's the continent south of the equator. All right? So Australopithecus, the Australopithecines simply means this branch of apes that are appearing in the south of the equator, like I'm saying at the Sahel, south of the Sahel in the tropical rainforest there. Whereas Homo, there are at least 6 or 7 or 8 different Homo species, all extinct except sapiens, that of which there is some fossil record, and typically a fragment of the cranium. Follow me? All right. Moving forward then, so we're into a branch. This is another main node, if you will, between the Australopithecine and the Homo genus. But the interesting thing is these Australopithecine were already bipedal. Okay, so bipedal occur probably somewhere around here, precisely, between 2 and 3 million years ago. Bipedalism has drastic influence, drastic consequences for further development of the brain. You'll see why. Okay, meet the Australopithecines, of which we have some kind of fossil record. And these are representative, okay? You notice that I left them at the genus level. I did not go into species because even those are controversial. All these have been classified into the species level. But again, it's a little controversial. It's a work in progress. Those species, that the level of the species name may actually change with the discovery of a new fossil cranium that looks similar, but is nuanced in some particular way. So you understand that? These are representative. These are like types. As much as Meyer doesn't like them, we can talk of type. We could talk about the Sahelanthropus type at the genus level. We can talk about Ardipithecus, and we can talk about Australopithecus. And they have a chronological sequence according to the layering, the sediment layer where they occur. At least to date, this is the sediment layer where they have been found. Remember one principle way at the beginning about the sediment layers, that there should not be any contradiction there. You know, to find another fossil record in a more recent layer, that raises a big red flag. Now, it could happen because of geologic uplifting and so forth, that these geologic layers may have actually shifted and superimposed with time, but generally not, okay? And so it's important to have consistency on the layers, the sedimentation layer, and the dating of these guys, which can also be done by the chemical analysis of the bone. Then these are, of course, the reconstructions. Now, I'm going to tell you that there are two models that are operative here simultaneously. There is a deterministic model and there is a probabilistic model. Okay, so of these 6 photographs, which are deterministic and which are probabilistic? And it's very clear and very evident that 3 of these are deterministic and the other 3 are probabilistic, right? Give you a hint there with 3. Which are deterministic? The 3 skulls, because these actually exist in museums, in some drawer somewhere in the world. They have been found. So they definitely, determinately exist, all right? It's part of the fossil record. As poor as it is, it's not absent. It exists. So there it is. All right, so these exist, and you can see they're reconstructions of fragments done by the experts, aided with a lot of sophisticated computer modeling. But these 3 skulls are deterministic in the sense that they exist. You notice that there are jaws for 2 of them, lower jaws, and no lower jaw for Sahelanthropus. So it has to be inferred from the upper jaw, all right? And the denture, the denture pattern and so forth, because again, the upper and lower jaws are complementary. Notice, for example, here, the canine and this, I don't know what this is, it's a prey canine or incisor, fits into that wedge there, right? Okay. And then these guys are probabilistic. That's probably what they look like. And this is done by layers, by the way. It's very exciting, very interesting to do. What do they do first? Well, first they have to assemble the fragments of the actual fossil, right? Then what do? They take all kinds of photographs from it and reconstruct a 3D model on the computer. Then comes in what? The 3D printer, and makes a copy of this guy in plaster or in some kind of material. And then what do they do after that? They start putting on top of the reconstruction, which is a model, obviously, it's not going to work on the original. They start putting the layers. What comes first? What connects the bones together, right? The ligaments. Ligaments ligate or connect bone to bone, articulations. Excuse me. After they do the ligaments, they put on what? Muscles. And after the muscles, they put the skin. And on top of the skin, they're going to place the external stuff, hair, and everything else. Okay, so that's how they're done. And they are pretty realistic. And these are photographs. These 3 are photographs, but they're photographs of what? Of a reconstruction of a model that is very accurate, is what we call anatomically correct. All right? But it's also an estimate of, according to the bone structure, what the experts think that these 3 species look like. All right? And that's how it works. So this is on the Australopithecine line. How about on the Homo line? Because there's divergence anywhere, and there was a node there. So interesting, but if we're looking for the Homo, then we got to go in the other direction of the Y, correct? On the other side of the node. And the dating is also interesting, that this goes down to between 4 and 2 million years ago. Okay, well, here's the Homo. This is on the Homo line, the Homo genus. About a dozen different skeletons have been, fossils have been found. Many of them are, or some of them are cranii or fragments of cranii. Others are other parts of the skeleton. Starting around 2 million years ago, where the node was, right? Between what? Between 2 genera. What are the 2 genera? Southern apes Australopithecine, right? That we just saw. And now the Homo genus, the line. Okay, so about a dozen, again, depending on how they're classified, but there is some kind of a sequence here, broadly speaking, within 2 million years ago, within the last 2 million years, which is not really a long time for evolution, starting with this first branching between Homo habilis and Homo rudolfensis. The names can come by way of 2 or 3 backgrounds, either by function. What do you think habilis means? Was able, in other words, was nimble with the hands, okay, was able to do stuff. Otherwise, sometimes they're known as Homo faber, the one that made things, all right? And rudolfensis is, I'm not exactly sure, but I think it's a reference to the actual archaeologist who discovered the bone. May have been his last name, Rudolf, all right, his or her. So the other possibility at the species level is when it's the name of the discoverer or the name of the location. That doesn't necessarily talk about the function, like habilis. Ergaster is emerging, all right? Then there's another branching here. Erectus, Homo erectus, definitely pointing to the fact that it was upright, standing, bipedal. And another branching into over here. Antecessor, it's only jaws, fragments of jaws, the lower jaw and actually this is the upper jaw. These are teeth over here. And a piece, a fragment of the skull. You can see the crest of the orbits here, and a little bit of the back of the skull, or the top of the skull. Heidelbergensis is a reference definitely to Heidelberg, which is German. Bergen or Berg or Bergen is a town, like Berg in British. Heidel is, I think, is upper. This is the upper town in German, Latinized. All right, but that's another distinct skull that has been found, fossil. And finally, a branching here, very significant for us, because at least from one theory, this would be the last node, all right, from Heidelbergensis, Homo sapiens on one branch, and on the other branch, Neanderthalensis. Neanderthal, I think, is a reference to the primitive one again, so these names go back and forth. Okay, so you can see there is some kind of a sequence here in the past 2 million years, going from fossil to fossil as they are placed chronologically. Yes, Scott?
Habilis is like the one who uses tools, right?
Yes.
And then what was rudolfensis and ergaster?
Ergaster is emerging. I think that the reference is to emerge. Ergaster is the one that is emerging, the human, the Homo that is emerging, that is becoming distinct from the others. In this case, would be distinct from the Australopithecines. Okay. Rudolfensis, I think it's a reference to the last name of the guy who discovered it. I think, but I'm not sure. Yeah, sometimes it's, yeah, unfortunately. Well, you know, what are you going to do? It's a major thing. All right, so let's line them up. And let's line up the evidence on the deterministic side and on the probabilistic side and see what the experts tell us. Again, here are the 3 usual suspects, right, with their approximate dates of occurrence. Families, Rudolfensis, Ergaster, Erectus, Heidelbergensis, and Neanderthalensis. Their skulls, all right. There's definitely some reconstruction here. In all of these, there's some reconstruction. But according to the experts, anatomists, and it's a whole team of experts that comes into making these models, here are the models. If you want to read into this a gradual more human-like face, a more expressive face. If we compare the two extremes, anywhere from Neanderthal to habilis, if you had to say, if I asked you that you have to classify these two, let's go to the two extremes. Let's go from habilis, the best reconstruction that the scientists can give us today, to Neanderthal, understanding that these two are models, that they're based on real crania that have been found, okay? And I tell you, you have to, here are 2 boxes, 2 empty boxes. And you have to classify, you have to put these 2 faces, you have to put these 2 faces into either one of these 2 boxes. And only one face, one head in each box, okay? And one box is named ape, and the other box is named homo, or human. Let's translate it, okay? One box is named, let me make it a little easier, ape-like and human-like, the 2 boxes, okay? Ape-like and human-like. So which one is look more ape-like, which one looks more human-like? Knowing that they're ancestors, that they no longer exist, etc., etc. And you can use both. You can use the face, the reconstruction, and you can also use the skeleton, the skull, to compare, all right? To compare. Where would you put habilis and where would you put Neanderthal? Who would put habilis in the ape-like box? And who put habilis in the human-like box? Just your overall intuition as anthropologists and archaeologists, experts in your field. I think we would put habilis more in the ape-like box, no? Yeah. Just by the apes that we know today. Think of monkeys in general, right? Now think of humans in general. Humans, ugly humans that we have seen around, ugly human men that we have seen around. I think that we would put Neanderthal in the human-like box. No? Interesting.
They still have that brow though.
Yes, exactly. They still have the brow, but with regards to the prominence of the snout,
Yeah.
and it's unfortunate we don't have the lower jaw of habilis yet. Sometimes it may appear, but if we consider that it would match, we would think that it's a pretty prominent jaw. Okay, look at Rudolfensis. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting, you see, so when we start doing this, is comparative vertebrate anatomy. Okay, we're comparing anatomy, and that's what these guys do. These guys and gals, that's what they do. All day long, they are comparing these bones one to the other. So whenever something like this is found, it's a big to-do for that field, even if it's just a piece, a fragment, because today with computers, you can reconstruct the whole thing with some degree of certainty. All right, so you see how it works? And it turns out that the chronology matches. The chronology, at least there's no contradiction in the chronology. You know, we don't have Neanderthal appearing. This skull did not appear before habilis, thank God, on the sedimentary layers. All in Africa. Well, actually, Neanderthal all the way to Europe, which also makes sense that it took time to get to Europe, right, for Homo. Okay, and I put down as a reference here the human Homo sapiens, right, or what is known as anatomically modern man. In other words, if we were to look at this human, whether man or a woman, from what's 0.2 million years ago in thousands. Let's go to 1,000 scale, because now, see, we're also going further in. All right, more and more specific adaptedness, so our time range is getting smaller. We can go from millions of years to thousands of years. That's, you know, an order of magnitude smaller. So 0.2 million years is actually 200,000. Now we're in the range of thousands. You know, 200,000 million years, 200,000 years ago. If we were to see a human, a man or a woman, okay, a Homo sapiens of 200,000 years ago walking around. Clothes could be very deceptive. As scientists, naked, we would not be able to distinguish them, or they would be anatomically equivalent to how we would look also naked, considering the variety, the variation that exists in the human species today. Because you line up men of the same age, throughout the world, and women of the same age throughout the world, and there's going to be variation, right? Big time variation in height and width and so on and so forth. But the same, probably back then, there would have been much less variation. It's an intuition. Why? And it's an inference because we're not there, okay? But why is it reasonable to intuit that there would be much less variation of the anatomically modern human, man or women, 200,000 years ago than today? It's a numbers thing. Sorry? It's a numbers thing. How many? Exactly. Much fewer, right? If I have, where am I going to find more variation? Between 2 giraffes or 200 giraffes? How about a few thousand or a few hundred? We don't know how many of these hominins were around back then, okay? That's another reason why the fossil record is scarce. They certainly were not 7 billion, but we are today 7 billion, so certainly there's a much broader range of variation. And that's another thing I also want to point out, and I'm getting close to stop here for the break. All right, so we have these fossil records, namely the cranii, and then we have the reconstructions, these models, which are what we call anatomically correct, but they're also approximation according to the experts. Couple of more slides before I stop. This is a little bit of recap. Since we have been looking at skulls, well, let's look at then brain capacity or volume by cubic centimeters. Okay, cubic centimeters. Remember the big break, the big node between the paninin and the hominin? Okay, that was between 8 and 5 million years ago, or between 7 and 6 million years ago, depending if you take the broad range or the narrow range. Okay, still the middle is 6.5 million, no matter how you cut it. That would be chimp on this side, and hominin on this side. So paninin is this one, and hominin is this one, all right? Who is Pantroglodytes? Anybody know? Pantroglodytes? It's like there. It's a chimp. It's a chimpanzee. Okay? So this is a chimpanzee. So be careful. There's a caveat. Caveat enter. This is a contemporary species, whereas how about Australopithecine? This is Australopithecus africanus. Lucy. This is extinct 2 million years ago. All right? But my point is that look at Lucy's brain, Lucy's skull. 450 cubic centimeters. The chimp today, 400 cubic centimeters. So it's an increase of what? Just barely 10%, a little over 10%, but an increase. At least it's not a decrease. All right, it's an increase. So it's the beginning of something. The Australopithecines already had approximately, on average, 10% more brain volume than the paninins that exist today, at least, that exist today. All right? And that's even given the benefit of the doubt, because since this exists today, it could be that there has been brain development also in the paninin from 5 to 8 million years ago. So this is the largest number. This is the, let's say this is the outside number of the paninin, all right, or the higher number. Okay, so there's the beginning of something here by about 10%. Now we're going to go into the genus Homo, and drill in there on brain capacity by measuring the skull, the volume of the skull. All right. Again, we don't have any soft tissue from fossils. Homo habilis, which would be about 2.5 million years ago. You know, it's another leap from 4 million to 2 million. 550 cubic centimeters. So another 100 cubic centimeters, that's about 1/4. Okay, so it's ramping up. 1/4 more. Homo habilis. How about Homo erectus here? Look at the jump. Between 2.5 and 1.8 million years ago. Okay, less than, so you notice that the time range is getting smaller and the brain capacity is getting larger. So what do we call that? We call that inversely proportional, okay? And so that is pointing to a geometric progression, not arithmetic. Arithmetic is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? If you connect those dots, you get a linear, you get a straight line. Geometric is 1, what follows? 2, what follows in geometric progression? 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 132. It's doubling, all right? So it's ramping up. But chronology, the amount of time, chronology is linear, right? 1 year is exactly the same length as another year. Okay. So already from habilis to erectus, double the brain size in less than 1 million years. Something must have happened here about 1 million years ago that was pretty significant. Between 1 and 2 million years ago, that was pretty significant for this jump. Okay, because this is organic. We're looking at an effect that occurred organically. Further in, to 500,000 years ago, approximately, Neanderthal, 1,500 cubic centimeters. Okay? So, another jump. In fact, Neanderthal actually has a bigger brain, or at least a bigger cranium than the human. Today's cranium is average 1,350 cubic centimeters, whereas Neanderthal was up to 15, and some have gone up to 1,600 that they've measured. All right, 1,600. And yet, we outlived them. So this, the speculation is that there is an optimization here, okay? It could be that the brain, that Neanderthal's brain was actually too big, meaning too heavy, got in the way. It's speculation. But the fact is that the human brain today is smaller, slightly smaller, about 10%, than the Neanderthal brain, and yet we outcompeted them because we coexisted in Europe as recent as about 40,000 years ago, all right? Which is very recent in evolutionary time, 40,000 years. Okay, moving forward. So you see the big picture here is obviously a tripling of the brain capacity, maybe quadruple from 4 to 1,350 is a quadrupling, 4 times, 400. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Sorry. So 400 times the brain capacity, okay? However, and this is, okay. The other caveat here is variation. Variation, we have to adjust and we have to be aware of variation, variance. Because again, no two individuals of the same species are exactly identical, all right? And that applies to contemporary species, and that applies to the fossil record, to extinct species, all right? We don't have the exclusivity in variation. And so these are CTEs of skulls, human skulls, contemporary human skulls, just to show variation. Look at the variation in size, and one could speculate brain volume, all right? Compare this volume to this volume, and they are to scale, this one to this one. Look at the prominence of the face, of the jaw, as opposed to recessed jaw. These are contemporary computer imaging, not drawings, okay, of real skulls. The front, look at the width, big variation, right? Look at the sockets, the flat socket versus V-shape. From below, looking up, look at the prominence of the lower orbitals here, whereas recessed. Pretty varied, correct? So when we go back and look at these skulls, who's to tell us that this was the average Homo habilis skull? Could have been off to, it could have been one of the tails, right? We would assume a normal distribution. That's reasonable to assume a normal distribution because we see it today. But these could have been at the tails. Again, it points to the paucity of the record. All right, so definitely these are approximations. However, you know, for some, more have been found, and that's why I'm going to stop here with this slide. Here is putting it all together on a graph, and you can match the symbol to the graph and the plots. Look at these yellow squares down here. They represent the Paranthropus, and as we say Paranthropus, we can also say the Australopithecines and that whole branch there, the non-Homo branch, okay, of the hominins. That's what they represent here. They are in the 400 to 500 cc range, and they are also in the 1.5 to 2.5 million year ago range. You see them? Okay. And these are individual findings, and there is just a slope there. But you notice that in general, okay, I'll talk about the slope in a minute. Next group, habilis. Now we are, anything from here up is in the habilis, in the Homo genus, all right? So habilis and rudolfensis, represented by a red triangle, open. They cluster here, you see them? Moving up, erectus and ergaster, and rhodesiensis is another one. It was found in Rhodes, the island of Rhodes. Okay. Open square, open red square, more dispersed, but they cluster here. You see the open red squares? They cluster here. What's going to be important about this is the slopes and the tendency on the slopes. Sapiens, Helmei is another one. Closed squares, they are here. Erectus from Asia. So you see these two are African. Then next one from Asia, closed red circles, very tight here. Okay, about 190,000 years ago. Finally, in Europe, Neanderthal and Heidelberg, closed circle, cluster here, again, fairly tight cluster. Finally, modern human, you can see that there is a much broader range on the CCs, normalizing around 1350 here. Here's 1350, okay, but a much broader range. Now, whereas the Neanderthal and the Heidelberg the red circles, the solid circles. They would cross, if we were to take the norm here, it should be around here between 15 and 1600 cc's. Okay? All right, now let's look at the slopes. What's interesting about the slopes? What are the slopes? The slopes are the gray lines, linear, so it's a linear progression, all right, or linear regression. What do you notice about the slopes? First of all, positive, negative, or neutral? Positive except for number 6, right? Which belongs to number 6 is the human. Okay? This negative slope is to the open circle. In other words, is the human. So all the slopes are positive except for the human. Now, they're positive or negative relative to what? Relative to the independent variable. The independent variable is on the x-axis, which is, what is the x-axis measuring? Chronology, years, millions of years, thousands of years, K for 1,000, right? So years before present. So the x-axis is measuring time. Why is it the independent variable? Because time doesn't care whether there is anyone here or not. Time continues. That's why it's independent. The dependent variable on the y-axis is what? Brain size. And there is a correlation. The general correlation between time and brain size is what? The general correlation is positive, right? So all the slopes are positive as we move in time. The more, let's take the first one, Paranthropus. The more recent one has more brain capacity, right? How about for habilis? Well, it's a short range of time, but again, the slope is, the more recent one is the larger brain capacity. Number 4 is, 4 and 5 are more expanded because they cover what? They cover more time. Look at 4. What are 4? 4 are the African hominins. The more time, the larger brain capacity. Also 5 for the European ancestors. The more time, the larger brain capacity in general. This is according to the strata where they were found, the sedimental layer. Except for the human, there has been a regression, okay, according to the slope, which is an average, which means that we're going on a probabilistic model, okay, on average. But it's interesting that there seems to be an optimization of the brain, of the human brain, whereby at some point in the last 200,000 years, okay, the last 200,000 years, we have optimized the brain size and we have outlived all the other homos that have existed, at least from the fossil record. Okay, so this diagram is very informative, matching up the fossil record to the slope of brain size, of at least the cranium capacity. Okay, let me stop there. Take a little break. It's, wow, 11:20. So let me pause this for a moment. We'll start recording again. Yes. So any questions or comments? No? People are good? You can follow it? Yes, John?
Do some scientists believe that Neanderthals and modern humans interbred?
It's controversial. Some do and some don't. But at the end of the day, where's the evidence? You know, we have not found yet, or the scientists, anthropologists have not found yet that hybrid skeleton, if you will, the hybrid fossil record. So it's speculation, all right? However, elaborating a little bit more, if they are two distinct species, then if you're going to use the biological definition of species, they should not have been able to interbreed. Okay? Or if they did, it would have been literally a hybrid that would have been sterile. So that would have been an inlet. But still, there could be a hybrid fossil at some point that crops up. Very interesting. But so far, no. All right, so just to recap briefly, the only living species of the hominin tribe is Homo sapiens. And there are at least 6 to 8 different Homo species that are all extinct, depending on how you classify them, but those are all the skulls and the reconstructions that I've shown you. I've only shown you the skulls, by the way, but there are other bones that have been discovered, even partial skeletons, which is more exciting because it gives you a fuller view of the animal. All right, the main biological characteristic of the hominin tribe is that they are bipedal. But remember, hominin also includes the Australopithecines, namely Lucy. And so she was bipedal, but she was not on the Homo line, different genus, not to mention the species for sure. How about biological and behavioral characteristics of the Homo, of the genus Homo? 3 main ones, at least 3 main ones. Beyond being bipedal, because we share bipedalness with, or the Homo share bipedalness with Australopithecines, all right, is the increased brain size for sure, because Lucy was around, I think, was it 450 or something like that, cc's, cubic cc's, whereas on the Homo line, it took off fairly quickly into the 1,000. And all the way to us, 1,300, 1,350. Making tools, not just using tools. One thing is to use a tool, and the other thing is to make a tool. It's a higher level of cognition to actually make a tool, all right? Third is the use of fire, harnessing fire, which again, we don't see any other species doing this. And that is a tremendous potential, okay? So moving forward, here are some examples. The first evidence that we have of making tools about 2.5 million years ago. Again, we share this with the Australopithecines, but they are these flakes of stone, which were simple to make, essentially hitting one stone with another and using the sharp edge of that stone. But the fact of generating this, of making, of actually creating this tool requires a higher thinking process, okay? And this is where we can literally draw the line between other species that use tools, even to this day, as for example, the chimp, and a number of birds that use typically a little twig to get out insects from a hole or something like that to eat, all right? And there's some evidence of some apes, chimp and gorillas using either stones or sticks for aggression or for posturing or something like that, which is different than for feeding, for foraging, or for defense, or for aggression, okay? But never making tools. So you see there's a qualitative difference here of making a tool, as far as you know, only in the Homo line. But that happened about 2.5 million years ago. Fire is even more interesting. The first evidence of fire to date has been found in a cave, not surprisingly, in Africa, South Africa, about 1 million years ago. This cave, Wonderwerk Cave, has some German influence on the name. When we look at the evidence in a microscopic scale, we see some evidence of burned bones, but the burning of the bone has been established not to be from a wildfire or something like that, but rather from something that would be more similar to a campfire, a lesser intensity fire for a longer period of time, okay? And so this is pointing toward what? A burn bone in a campfire points to cooking. Again, we don't see any other animal cooking. And that could explain the more recessed jaw and more delicate facial features, especially around the mouth, because when we cook food, we pre-digest it. We're actually pre-digesting the food when we cook it, so that it's partially digested already when we eat it, and therefore it needs less grinding, less tearing, and all that. So that's the advantage about cooking food. And these primitive people picked up on it. Okay? That the digestion was not as hard to do if they cooked the meat, which may have happened by serendipity. Someone dropped a piece of boar or whatever they were hunting on the campfire, and they were hungry enough to eat it and say, oh, this actually tastes good. With regards to fire, a little more specifically, at least 4 main characteristics of harnessing fire or managing fire, whatever you want to call it, using fire for defense. Okay? So whereas before the lion was chasing me across the savannah, now with fire, I can actually chase the lion. Okay, so the roles just reversed. What was the selective pressure on me, now I'm going to select. Okay, so sleeping around the campfire with the risk of getting burnt overnight, but at least it keeps the other, because every other animal out there is afraid of fire. Okay, instinctively, naturally, they flee from fire. Warmth, especially as they radiated out of Africa into particularly Europe and moving ever more northward, those winters were getting more and more gruesome. For lighting at night inside a cave, okay, never mind black lung and all that, but at least they could light up the night with the fire. So it extends their hours of activity. Cooking, I spoke about already. So these are at least 4 distinct benefits that come from harnessing fire, which happened at some point, and it only happened in the Homo line, and about 1 million years ago, at least from the evidence that we have today. Another one, which happened much later, much more recently, burying the dead. See, I'm loading it up now to make the transition toward the spiritual act of humanity, and looking at this issue of being God's image. Requires some intuition about God, some intuition about the supernatural, metaphysics, etc., some projection into a future that is otherworldly. All right? And one possible evidence of that is to bury the dead. It could have started maybe by trying to remember the ancestors. We know that a number of cultures have what is known as ancestor worship, or have a superlative reverence to their older ones. A lot happens in Asian cultures in general. But it could also be the beginning of an awareness of a supernatural, of an afterlife. Because no other animal actually buries dead, and not in a ritualistic, not in a ritualistic way. In other words, putting food in there into the grave and clothing and stuff like that. Okay? So this is very significant for trying to make now the transition in the last few classes into being God's image and not doing violence to the fossil record and the possibility of evolution. There's also evidence of a Neanderthal burial. Okay, so I'm sorry. Going back, this is in Israel to date. This is the oldest grave found about 100,000 years ago. It's a burial site in a cave. And it seems to be a mother or a woman, an adult woman, and a child. An adult woman and a child. And they can tell male, female, mostly by the pelvic structure. Whereas on the Neanderthal, I found this one interesting because my question is, did Neanderthals have a soul? All right. Even though there are different species biologically, did they have a soul? Because if we're looking at the phylogenetics of the human, of God's image, in other words, were Adam and Eve, what the Bible calls Adam and Eve, were they Neanderthals? Were they Homo sapiens? Or earlier? What would be the evidence for the possibility of positing a soul, of thinking or inferring the reasonableness of a soul, of even soul, right? One certain, to me, certainly, one evidence would be a belief in the afterlife. Because that would come from the soul, that would come from the conscience, that would come from some awareness, some intuition that there is something more than this life here on Earth. No other animal, they just live and die and get recycled. Luis?
I read somewhere, but I don't remember where. One of the reasons for burial was to basically preserve the loved one from being ravished by animals.
Yes, could be.
But now you're saying that this is possibly an evidence of an afterlife.
Of the belief in an afterlife.
Of a belief in afterlife.
Exactly.
And of course, we see this with sometimes they bury food with them. The Chinese celebrate this.
Yes, that one in particular. The food definitely is a pointer to what Egyptians did it too, right?
Yeah.
And maybe the Hindus. No, they typically cremate. But back to your point, all right, so, but they're not mutually exclusive. You see, trying to preserve a cadaver, a human cadaver, from being ravaged by the beasts. Why? Why do that? No other animal does that. They walk away from their dead. They walk away from their dead moms, okay, or their dead children. Why try to preserve it? Some sense of reverence, right? Some sense of respect, some sense of even trying to preserve the loved one. See? And where do you posit that desire? We call the human conscience or the human soul, maybe. Anyway, more to come on that, but I want to point out that this one is in La Chapelle, which is in France. This is also, this area of La Chapelle is where the other primitive cave paintings have been found from Homo sapiens, okay? Just like Altamira, for example, in Spain. I'll show you more pictures about, but those primitive cave paintings that have been found from anywhere from 20 to 200,000 years ago, or 150,000 years ago, depending on the glacier, how far down the glaciers went in Europe. These caves have been found where primitive humans have inhabited. There's plenty of evidence, not only fossil record, but all remains, human remains, including fire places and remains of animals that were eaten, to the point that even the bones of the animals have gnashes on them, have yes, from the grinding of the teeth of what was eating them, was eating on them. Okay, and the paintings, of course, that's definitely a human characteristic. All right, so bipedalism, I want to pick up now on bipedalism, because bipedalism happened again about 2.5 million years ago. Let me go back a little bit here. Already the Australopithecines were bipedal, namely Lucy, the one that left the footprints on the mud. Okay, so they were bipedal. So bipedalism happened before the Homo genus, and therefore we share that bipedalism with Australopithecines. But there's one tremendous advantage to bipedalism. Oh, I forgot I was going to bring that thing out. And let me do it now. Someone can give me a hand. Put this one in the middle. Pull out the skeleton. Okay, so let's do it over here. It was a student, motivated, so his body, at least he donated his body to science. We say that too.
Get him out of here.
Yes. Don't go, have it over there.
Where do you want to put him?
Yeah, right next to him, because I just want to compare it to skeletons. We call it the discovery lab for a reason. Yes, it's articulated. These things are articulated. Of course, it's all plastic, right? It's not a.
Is that real?
It's not a real skeleton, but that is articulated.
And this one, that one came from the father's first school. Father's first middle student. There's 4.
All right, so what happens with bipedalism is that the hands become free. Okay, well, for grabbing, the hands become free for doing stuff like making tools. The freeing of the hands is considered very, very significant. Dislocated joint, dislocated elbow, or yeah, elbow. All right, and this happened about 2 million years ago, more or less, 2.5 million years ago in Africa. What would trigger this bipedalism? What I'm showing here is the skeleton of troglodytes of the chimp and the skeleton of the human in walking, the typical walking posture. The typical walking posture of the chimp and the great apes in general is called knuckle walking. In other words, they can get up on 2 legs periodically. They can get up on their hind legs periodically and walk around, all right? But sooner or later, they have to go down on all 4 because they get tired. And it's a structural thing. Their center of gravity is around here. That's the center of gravity for the whole body. Whereas the center of gravity for the human is here. And so it's very, very vertical. And it falls fair and square on top of the hip, which then displaces the center of gravity of the upper body down to 2 columns. Right? These are the 2 legs. You notice that the displacement is very, very well done. You see, the bulk of our weight is from the waist up, especially the head, which is by far the largest, the heaviest part of our body by volume. And so all that comes down vertically to the central part of the coccyx, and then that weight is displaced down through the hips to the legs, which are, for engineering purposes, 2 columns. And it's a very well displacement of the weight down to 2 fairly narrow columns, right? The legs. Whereas in the chimp and the other great apes, you can see that even if they go up on 2 legs, how can I get out of this? And this for a moment, going to the internet, and let's look at what I'm going to put here is standing chimp. Let's put the chimp, which is the closest one, or even walking. Okay, so their typical walk is the knuckle walk. All right, you can see it here. They actually go down on their knuckles on the forelegs, the front limbs. And they can walk on two for a while, even holding hands. But at some point they get tired and they have to go down. They walk on two for a while, but eventually they have to go down on all four. And that is simply a structural thing. It has to do with the spinal cord, which for the human, you can see is S-shaped. This, the lumbar region, all right, where we have the problems with slip disc, slip disc, okay, it's an S-shape. Whereas for the chimp, it's just a single curve, a single simple curve. You can see it there, all right? So that when the chimp goes up on two, the body is constantly being pushed forward. It doesn't displace, so the hip has a different function for the chimp than for the human. And that makes a big difference because for the human, it allows the human to walk essentially indefinitely with the hands free. Okay? And so, since the hands are no longer being used, the arm, for locomotion, they also get shorter. Okay, notice the length of the arm of the chimp as compared to the human. Now, how could that have come about? Because we're observing an effect, we're observing a phenomenon, we're observing a phenotype, a morphological difference that frees up the hands for work, for tool making, and everything else. It happens to correlate, again, on the time scale, it correlates with a climatological change that happened in Africa, in Central Africa, over the past 10 to 15 million years, more or less, which is a gradual desertification, beginning with a very lush tropical rainforest. This thing keeps getting in the way, sorry. Okay, a tropical rainforest, about 10 to 15 million years ago, estimated, again, from the fossil record and the layers of sediment and the vegetation that was found there and so forth. Gradually, from a tropical rainforest to what is known as a tree savanna. The savanna is pretty much an open range. And you can have either a tree savanna where there are still trees prevalent, mostly acacia types, but certainly not as lush as a tropical rainforest where you have much more biodiversity, even on the vegetation side. To further desertification or drying up into what is known as a bush savanna, where the actual trees are more and more scarce. Okay? So what is the typical habitat for most monkeys? The ground or the tree? The tree. And they're designed for being up in the tree. But if those trees start disappearing, that's a selective pressure right there. The trees are disappearing, now we gotta go on ground. And guess what? On ground, there are more dangers, there are more predators, etc. So we got to get more agile. And if there's still some trees around, we can still hop onto the tree and try to climb up there. But if even those trees are beginning to disappear, now I just have wide open range. I'm in full exposure now. So you can see how in this kind of setting, in a primitive setting, where we're not going to outrun the tiger or the lion or the panther or the cheetah, fire becomes very handy. Okay? And even weapons, actual weapons, tool making. So that's the speculation. What drove bipedalism was the gradual disappearance of a lush tropical rainforest through a savanna stage into a bush, savanna, open range, open prairie. And in fact, this is a photograph. This is a satellite photograph of Africa today. And here's the equator. You can see coincides with this still lush tropical rainforest, mostly around the Congo. Here's Lake Victoria. And then just north and south also, desertification. This, of course, is the Great Sahara Desert. Here's the Arabic Peninsula, pretty desertic, okay? Suez Canal, Egypt. Here's the desembocadura, the, what do you say, how do you say? The mouth of the river, yes, what do you call that? The estuary delta, thank you very much. The delta, it actually looks like a delta, okay, of the Nile River can be seen from satellite. Huge, very, very rich, but that's just about the only region that has significant vegetation, right? And the rest of it is the Sahara Desert. And this is the Sahel here. That's the boundary, the Sahel, okay? Sorry? Hormuz, oh, the Strait of Hormuz, yes. Which one? Here, yes, okay, yes, and it's near the Suez Canal, right? Yeah. Okay, and so this is what is estimated to have been about 14 million years ago. Much more tropical in general, okay, much more vegetation, and so there was a climatological change. Also notice that they have put here the contour. See this white line? This is a contour of what was believed to be the landmass of the time. All right, so it was different landmass, and there's another map that illustrates that also. But keep in mind that the landmasses have shifted because of tectonic plates and continental drift, which is occurring to this day, slowly but surely moving. And when the landmasses move around, for example, here, the Mediterranean was much smaller. In fact, there was one time that the Mediterranean was closed at Gibraltar. Okay, it was actually like a humongous lake, but it was closed. And this opened up at some point, and there was a huge waterfall, estimated to have been a huge waterfall of salt water going through into the Atlantic from the Mediterranean. And now there's a current that goes back and forth. But notice also it's showing here some tectonic plates, some, see this yellow line and this other yellow line here of rub between plates. So that could have triggered a shift in the continents, which could have triggered the development of the Mediterranean Ocean, and that could have triggered a climatological change. That's the whole point. But certainly there's a great amount of desert here, which is loss of vegetation, of very large, significant vegetation. So in general, those animals were pushed to land. Some survived, many didn't, and those are extinct today. And that could have been a big driving force in the whole bipedalism of the Homo genus. Now, it's not disputed then that human life or the hominin line likely started in Africa, probably around Central or Eastern Central Africa, more or less around generally Lake Victoria region, where it would have been abundant with biodiversity. What is controversial then is the dispersal rate and the dispersal pattern of hominins as they move through Africa and out of Africa. And that dispersal happened anywhere between 1 million to 200,000 years ago. All right, so here's a map that is giving one theory. Here's Lake Victoria and the Great Rift Valley. Central Africa, here's the equator, all right? So if it started more or less around here, the hominin differentiation, it's logical to think that they move generally toward the coast, and it would have been the eastern coast where there was fishing, there was abundant life, and there was also the coast itself served simultaneously as a defense barrier and also as a limit factor of the end of migration. So if the general movement was from west to east, at some point they hit the shoreline and they have to stop there. The only options are either go north or go south.
Why from west?
Well, because it's thought that it started in Central Africa somewhere, inland, not on the coast. Because of, again, the fossil record. The fossil record is older here and a little more recent, closer to the coast. So it's a gradient, right? Then what happens? They hit the coast, you got two options. You go south or you go north. And again, trailing of the fossil record along these places. Also notice, by the way, that this map has superimposed the dark brown is the current landmass. But the ancient landmass, maybe 10 to 15 million years, I don't know if it establishes, okay, as recent as 65,000 years ago, the coastline was different, it was the blue. Okay, so for example, New Guinea and Australia were connected. That's a natural bridge there. That's a landmass bridge. And all of this area, Vietnam and Malaysia, that's all estimated to have been connected as recently as 65,000 years ago. So that helps the migration route, see, following the coast. Moving north around the Arabian Peninsula into east, this is India. Much easier to move through India along the coast than to try to cross the Himalayas up here, the largest mountain range in the world, the tallest. So continue along the coast. What do you have? Generally a tropical or subtropical environment, which is richer in biodiversity, more abundant food sources, and so forth, all the way down into the South Pacific. And so there are two prevailing models, either a single wave out of Africa, but most likely a multi-regional, several waves out of Africa, of the hominin line, several waves, specifically of the Homo genus, because at some point we're finding those fossil records in Asia, in Europe. They have to get there somewhere from somewhere else. Okay? Michaela, you had a question?
I was just wondering why you say controversial if the fossil record supports it.
Controversial is how the dispersal pattern occurred, all right, and when it occurred.
Oh.
Because again, keep in mind, why this fossil that I found here today, that I date to 500,000 years ago, why should it be representative? Maybe it's an extreme, okay? So the fact that we find fossils doesn't mean that those fossils are right at the norm, at the center of the norm of that species. They could be skewed. Yeah. So there is this gradual radiation. In the big picture, yes, the gradual radiation is there based on the fossil record, starting from Africa, moving into the Middle East, Asia, Australia, Europe. And it makes sense because it's a gradual radiation. So you just look at geography. You put a focal point and then you draw the lines of divergence, and you see that there's a radiation pattern. And there it is. Beginning here, between 60 to 70,000 years ago, out. There was probably some contact here with admixture with Neanderthals, and moving into Europe through Asia. This is, by the way, the Bosphorus Straits in what is today Turkey. This on this side of Asia is Turkey. On the European side is I think Romania or Greece is down here, okay, on the European side, all the way into the Iberian Peninsula, Northern Europe, whereas the southern route went along Southeast Asia into India and continued into East Asia, one branch down into the Polynesian Islands and Australia, New Zealand, the other branch moving up into Asia, and there's another branch moving from inland directly. Eventually, across the Bering Straits, here are the Bering Straits, here is what is today Russia, and here today is Alaska. Across, the northern route took them all the way to Greenland. This is Greenland. And the southern route took them along the coast, more or less, along the Rocky Mountains, down Mexico, Central America, into South America. This arrow is a very general arrow. Most likely it was closer to the coast along the Pacific. And they would have diverged also, staying, because keep in mind there's a whole mountain range starting in Alaska, more or less continuous, down into Baja California here, the California Peninsula. Then Mexico, that mountain range disappears in Central America, and then it's picked up again in the south by the Andes. That continues to trail the west, exactly, all the way down to Tierra del Fuego in Chile, right? Whereas the eastern side in general is more flat and allowing for dispersal radiation. But what you have to superimpose to this map is also glaciations that have been occurring, the last of which that we know of, I think at least 5 glaciations that have occurred that we have evidence of in the past 500,000 years. So it's certainly within this range. And the last one about 10,000 years ago. That's very recent. And depending on how far down those glaciations went, that would limit the pattern of dispersal, because in a glaciation, we're talking about ice that is 1 mile high, okay? It's not just a little sprinkling of snow or some little black ice there on the road. It's a definite, genuine wall of ice that is insurmountable for the primitive conditions of these people. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's the pattern there, estimated in broad strokes, certainly starting in Africa, dispersing out, following more or less the hunt, and following also the climate, whatever was more benevolent for survival, including the seasons and so forth. So we can expect seasonal movement into the north and receding back south in the wintertime and moving up north in the summer and so forth. All right, from here we're going to go into the biblical evidence for the human as God's image and how we can possibly integrate these two rivers of knowledge, if you will, into a full picture of the human person, a theological anthropology. Any questions or comments or stuff?
Just the It was from Africa and then into,
Here, this one,
the other one.
previous.
Yeah, here.
Okay.
Wait, no.
Further down, I have a couple that are text.
Yeah, there.
This one.
Africa to the Middle East.
Right. Okay, so remember, I'll send you this, but basically we have Africa as a focal point. Probably Central Equatorial Africa, most likely. That's the more abundance of the fossils are there. And then migrating out, general movement eastward. Okay, so what happens when we go east on Africa? Well, we hit the ocean. We hit either the Indian Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, and then it's a question of moving north. Actually, it's the Pacific Ocean there, moving north, also moving south, but moving south, one stays always within Africa, right? Moving north has a possibility of going out into the larger continental masses that were around at that time. And again, following the contour more or less, one would eventually end up in India, and beyond that into Asia. Even further beyond that into the South Pacific. It gets more island hopping by the time you get down there. In fact, I did not insert here, but there's another fellow that was found. Have you heard of the Floresienses, Homo Floresienses, right, in the island of Flores?
No.
It's an archipelago of islands in the South Pacific. Let's look at that for a moment. But some anthropologists are actually placing Homo floresiensis as a subspecies, or maybe even a species of a Homo by itself. They were small, they were tiny compared to us today. Fossil, but that's what they look like according to some renditions. In my opinion, it's looking very Australian. The Australians have this look that is not really African, but it's very black. And the hair is not curly at all. It's fairly straight. Yeah. Oh, then you have to be careful what. Okay, so here's a scale. It's got some other hominins over here. Probably Lucy is one of this. This is probably Lucy because she was a female. And this would be Homo floresiensis, half our size. Let's see here we go. Here's a little tiny island of Flores. See where it is that whole archipelago down here in Southeast Asia. I think this is Vietnam, for example. Right, and then this is Malaysia. Borneo. This should be the coast of Australia over here. That's where they found the fossil. Again, to scale. Too small. Right. Now, it did not have, I don't think they found any clothing on the site, which to me is significant because of the issue of the human soul or consciousness. But just a little insight that there's that reference in the first couple of chapters of Genesis. They were naked and they felt no shame. And then after the fall, they dress up. So I think it makes a difference, for example, let's say for Neanderthal and even primitive Homo sapiens, where they were wearing their clothing. If the clothing was around the chest or around the waist. because they would have different functions, no? What's your intuition? If the clothing is, let me see. I put here primitive human clothing. This is just like a little foretaste of what I want to get into, but I want to see actual or fossil. But we put fossil clothing. It's going to give me all kinds of creepy stuff. It's not specific enough. Oh, scholarly. You put scholarly, no? This is supposed to keep it more scholarly. Okay, so clothing is going to depend a lot. Example. Let's take those two options. The option of wearing clothing around the chest or wearing clothing around the waist. What's your intuition? Do you think it has different functions or not? Why would it have different functions?
One would be right around the chest, maybe for warmth, and the waist was for,
For protecting the genitals,
yeah.
protecting sexual organs, and could be associated with shame, right? Or pudor. Whereas if it's for temperature, most likely it will be around the chest. And that, in other words, I'm looking for tangible stuff that would be left. It's known as material remains. What are the material remains of these primitive people? They leave a campfire. Well, a campfire, a rhinoceros doesn't build a campfire. An orangutan doesn't build a campfire. A chimpanzee doesn't build a campfire.
As far as clothing,
yes,
it won't be. It probably will be more like skin. Like,
yeah, sure. It'll be natural clothing, animal.
Yeah.
As opposed to fig leaves. There, of course.
Could that survive? Could that survive over this time?
Some, at least some remains, maybe a few hairs of it. Who knows? But if it got cured, right? If curtido, if it became cured with desiccation and the mineralization of the clay around it or something like that, maybe there's some little remain of it. Plus, at this stage, we're in the range of thousands of years, not hundreds, not millions of years. We're in the range of 100,000 years, okay? 50,000, 100,000, 200,000. So there's certainly some animals that have been preserved, either in ice or in mud pits that the skin got cured. Do you know what I'm saying? So there could be some remain left. But my question is, was it chest clothing or was it waist clothing? To me, that would make a difference possibly as to the different function. Anyway, it's just a little foretaste of what I want to get into, where I want to drive it. And also the climate will make a difference, because if it's a warm climate, you don't expect these people to be wearing a chest cover necessarily. But if it's cold, yes. And vice versa with regards to the waist. These people may not wear a chest cover, but they may wear a waist cover. And the fact is that so far, for none of these other homos, clothing has been found. But yes, for Neanderthal, okay? For Neanderthal, yes. Some clothing has been found for Neanderthal. And there's even reference of some burial for Neanderthal. So that's pretty advanced as far as the human line is concerned, for positing the possibility of the soul. Okay, so you see bipedalism was very important to free up the hands, and then there's a synergy between freeing up the hands and the development of the cranium, twice, 3 times as large, because now it's stimulating the cranium to think more, how to make the better tool and so forth, how to use the fire in a better way, etc. Okay, basically this is what I have. I don't know if you have any questions or comments, but it all starts from accepting the biological classification of human, which the consequence is that then we have relatedness. We are related at different levels, okay? And what I hope to do in the next few classes is demonstrate that if we believe this or we accept this, it does not exclude from the possibility of God's intervention in the creation of the human. All right, thanks again. So I'll close it here. Stop recording.